Hey friends, what's up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Tes Zayin, Daf 16 of Masechta Sukkah. Man, Daf 16, huh? You know, Sukkah is such a funny little Masechta. It's like totally Eruvin and Shabbos, I would say. I would say Sukkah is like the hardest parts of Eruvin and Shabbos. Maybe not necessarily the hardest parts, but the harder parts for sure. Anyway, so the first part of the daf kind of starts off talking about using bed panels for schach. Kind of that gets into a question about, remember like the whole thing with like shalosh etzbos, or shalosh etzbos, and Masechta Shabbos. It's funny, Shabbos was like a funny Masechta because there's so much tumah and tara in Shabbos, which makes Shabbos actually pretty difficult. You know, I don't know who decided like what the most difficult Masechtas are, you know? They say that, right, Eruvin, Yevamis, which we haven't learned yet, and Nida are the hardest Masechtas. I don't know who decided that. Like, what's the criteria? But, because like Sukkah is very hard, right? The thing is, it's like 56 daf, so how hard can it be if it's only 56 daf? Maybe that's part of it. But I don't know who decided. Maybe I wonder who it is. Maybe we could speak with him, and he can tell us, or she could tell us, what the logic was. But anyways, there's some really hard stuff here. Like, why isn't Shabbos considered one of the hardest Masechta? There was a lot of hard stuff there. Anyways, up upon him. So we start off talking about these bed panels, and then we get to the sugya, an interesting sugya of hollowing out a pile in order to make a sukkah, which has come up in the past. We're going to learn actually an interesting spin on it. And then we get to a new Mishnah. The new Mishnah discusses good asik and good achis. Machlokas between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi over there. So, interesting stuff. Let's go weiter. So we're going to start on Daf Tes Vav Mud Beis, about halfway through the page, but it's a tiny little page, so by the two dots. So, O Baruchas Amito. So the Mishnah had said that, if you're going to use bed panels, what's a bed panel? Bed panels like this. If you can imagine, like a bed has like four legs, right? And then there's like a frame around it. So like the frame basically goes like from one leg to the next, right? You're going to have two longer ones and two smaller ones. Chevre, that's what we're talking about. Those horizontal kind of frame-y things. So, O Baruchas Amita. So, Lem Mesele, Reb Ami Bar Tavyomi, Dom Reb Ami Bar Tavyomi, Sikcha Bebaloe Kelim Psula. Ho ho. Chevre, what does that mean? It means the following. So basically, what did our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah says that Amakar Sukkah B'Shvudin or Ba'aruchos Amita. So if you use like skewers or if you use these bed panels, so we say that only if there's enough space, if there's like basically equal parts space and bed panel, only then it's kosher. Meaning, bed panels are not kosher schach; they're pasul schach. They can be kosher if you have like 50%, and then you fill it in with like kosher schach, whatever it is. But bed panels in and of themselves are pasul schach. So, let's say that this supports Reb Ami Bar Tavyomi, who says, the Amar Reb Ami Bar Tavyomi sikcha bebalo ekelim psula, that if somebody makes schach with worn out parts of garments, it's also possible. Now, see, what's interesting about the bed panel is that in and of itself, it should be kosher schach, right? Meaning, what is it? It's a piece of wood. What's wrong with a piece of wood? The problem is that when it was part of the bed, so the bed is a kli, and the bed is makabel tumah. And therefore, what we're saying is that even though you dismantled the bed, and now you have what seems to be kosher schach, right? This bed panel is what? It's just a piece of wood. Yet because it came from something, it was initially part of a kli, and when it was part of the kli, when it was part of the bed, so the bed is makabel tumah, so even when you dismantle the bed, and now you have a panel from the bed, which in and of itself, I would think is kosher for schach, but since it came from something that was possible for schach, meaning it came from a bed, which is a kli, so even when you dismantle it, it still has the status of a kli, and it's still going to be possible for schach, because it'll be makabel tumah. And therefore, we're saying that this is like Rav Nosson Bar Tavyomi, did I get that right? Reb Ami Bar Tavyomi, who says that if you have like a garment, now garment is makabel tumah, it's a kli, it's makabel tumah. So now if you have like a worn out part of the garment, which we're going to learn is less than 3 finger breadths by 3 finger breadths, and therefore it's not right? It's not fit for poor people or wealthy people. It's not fit for anybody. And therefore, it isn't anything in and of itself. A piece of fabric that's less than 3 etzbaos, 3 finger breadths by 3 finger breadths, isn't anything and would not be makabel tumah. However, because it came from a larger garment, and the larger garment is makabel tumah. So even now that you have a smaller garment, which in and of itself would not be makabel tumah because it's less than shalosh etzbaos by shalosh etzbaos, nonetheless, it retains its level of being makabel tumah, and therefore you cannot use it for schach. Okay, so let's start again. So let's say that the fact that we're saying that you're not allowed to use a bed panel, even though in and of itself I would think that there shouldn't be anything wrong with a bed panel. So let's say that this supports Rabbi Ami bar Tavyomi, that if you use for schach these worn out pieces of garments, that even though in and of themselves this little piece of fabric should be acceptable, it's not a kli or anything, but because it came from a larger kli, it's not acceptable. So that's the same thing as this bed panel, which came from a bed, which even though in and of itself it should be acceptable, we're saying it's not acceptable. So, Kida Amar of Chanan Amar Rav, Ba'arucha v'shtei kra'ayim, b'ktsar v'shtei kra'ayim. Achinami, Ba'arucha v'shtei kra'ayim, b'ktsar v'shtei kra'ayim. And for the Gemara, that no. This bed panel that we're talking about is not like we were assuming till now. It's not just a simple bed panel that it would be like pshutei kleitz. Rather, it's the bed panel with 2 legs, still attached to 2 legs. And because it's attached to 2 legs, the Gemara is going to ask, so like, what can you use that for that would make it a kli? But whatever it is, because it's a panel with 2 legs, it's actually not just pshutei kleitz, it's actually a kli. And therefore, because it's a kli, so then it is mikabel tumah. And because it's mikabel tumah, that's why you're not allowed to use it. But if it would just be that one panel, which is pshutei kleitz, it would be acceptable. And therefore it wouldn't be like Rabbi Ami bar Tavyomi. Okay? Now where is this statement of Rav Chanan Amar Rav? Right, we just said that it's talking about the bed panel with 2 legs, just like Rav Chanan Amar Rav says it's talking about the bed panels and 2 legs. When did Rav Chanan Amar Rav say that it's talking about the bed panel and 2 legs? Ahod etnan, on the following Mishnah. Mitim tamas chavilo miteres chavilo. Says the Tanakama, if you have a bed, okay, like a bed frame or whatever, legs, frame, and it becomes tameh. It's a kli, it becomes tameh. Now you want to make it tahor, so you have to chuck the entire bed into a mikvah. You wouldn't be able to take it apart and put it into the mikvah. You have to throw the entire kli, the entire bed, into the mikvah. Okay? Divrei Rabbi Eliezer, that's Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. Okay. Whereas the Chachamim say, mitamas sevarim, mitaher sevarim. Okay. Whereas the Chachamim say that it can even become tameh in its pieces. Excuse me, and you can put it in the mikvah to make it tahor also when it's in its pieces. My nihu. And what are these pieces that we're talking about? Right? Because if it's just pshutei kleitz, it wouldn't be makabel tumah. So what are these pieces that we're talking about? Amar Chanan, Amar Rav, Arucha v'shtei kra'ayim, ktsar v'shtei kra'ayim, says Rav Chanan Amar Rav, yeah, what these pieces are that we're talking about that can be makabel tumah and that you put in the mikveh as well, that is talking about the sort of bed panel with the 2 legs, right? So whether it's the longer one with the 2 legs or the shorter one with the 2 legs, whether it's by the head or by the body, whatever it is, that is what we are talking about. Okay, so that is where Rav Chanan Amar Rav says that we're talking about the bed panel with the 2 legs. It's talking about if it becomes tameh and you want to put it in the mikvah. Fine. The Ma'achazia. Now the Gemara says, yeah, but in order for something to be considered a kli, for it to be makabel tumah, it has to be useful. It has to be, what's a kli is something that you can use. What can you use a bed panel with 2 legs for? It'll be very difficult to sleep on just one bed panel with 2 legs for multiple reasons. It'll be uncomfortable. You have to stay balanced. I mean, that's not very usable. So, and for the Gemara, Well, what you could do is you could, imagine you have like the long panel and it's got two legs. So you can kind of put it at a little bit of a distance from the wall, and then you can like take two kind of bars and like put it between like this panel and two legs, and kind of like, dude, the best thing is to look at a diagram, but basically you can like put it at a distance from the wall and then like put other poles like connecting this little framey thing to the wall. Then you could use ropes and kind of make like a makeshift kind of hacked together bed using the wall as kind of like one end and this frame as the other, and connecting it with the poles and the ropes, and then you have a bed. Good night. Sleep well. Gufa, we said earlier. Omer Ami Bar Tavyomi, says Ami Bar Tavyomi, Sukkah bebaloi kelim psula, that if you use for schach these worn out garments, it's no good. My baloi kelim, what are these worn out garments? Omer Abai matlani shein boim shalosh shalosh, tuluchazin lanim v'lo lashirim. So says Abai, it's talking about these garments that are less than 3 etzbos by 3 etzbos, that they're just tiny, they're very small, they're not useful for anybody. Therefore, in and of themselves, they would not be considered kelim, and you would be able to use them for schach. However, since they came from a larger garment, and the larger garment is makabel tumah, so now when you just are left with this like smaller piece, it is not makabel tumah, even though in and of itself, Whoa, I don't know what I just said, but it comes from the larger garment. The larger garment is makabel tumah, and therefore when you have this smaller piece that comes from the larger garment, so even though in and of itself this smaller piece would not be makabel tumah because it's not fit lanim or lashirim, however, since it came from the larger garment, it is makabel tumah. Because it is makabel tumah, it's possible for schach, and you cannot use it for schach. Chever. Oh my goodness gracious. At least these aren't like new concepts for us. Like we've had them, even though it was like not quite 1 million years ago, but certainly 500,000. But at least we've heard these things before. They're not brand new. Let's go weiter. And let's say that we have a brayso that supports of Ami Bar Tavyomi, who says that when you have something smaller that in and of itself would be kosher schach, but it comes from something larger which would not be kosher schach, it's still possible. If you have a mat made out of shifa or gemi, it's like these different plant materials, I think. Even though they are smaller than their initial size, you still cannot use them for schach. So meaning if you have these mats, and these mats were made for sleeping, so that makes them a kli, and therefore you cannot use them for schach, but now the mat became smaller, and now it's smaller than the amount that would be considered useful for sleeping, and would be considered a kli. Nonetheless, you still are unable to use it for schach. Machzelas hakonim, if you have, where am I? I'm just checking out something. Okay, fine. Okay, where am I? So if you have a mat made out of reeds, gedola, so if it's large, so then it's not made for sleeping. So mesakhin ba, you can use it for schach because it's not made for sleeping. But kitana, if it's a smaller mat, then it's made for sleeping, and ein mesakhin ba, you're not allowed to use it for schach. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, afi mekabelas tuma ve'ein mesakhin ba. Rabbi Eliezer says that that even a smaller mat is still for sleeping, and no, even a smaller mat is not for sleeping. Wait, what am I talking about? The Tanna Kama said if it's katana, then it's not made for sleeping, and you can't. No, if it's katana, then it is made for sleeping, and ein mesakhin ba. Rabbi Eliezer's chiddush is that afi mekabelas tuma ve'ein mesakhin ba. That what? Even the larger one. Right, the Rebbe Eliezer is saying even the larger one, right? The Tanna Kama said that the Gedola is not made for sleeping, and therefore you can use it for schach. Says Rebbe Eliezer, no, even the larger one is afi mekabelas tuma. It also is mekabel tuma ve'ein mesakhin, but you can't use it for schach. Okay, but we see that the first part of the brayso said that if you have these, even if they became smaller than the initial size, you still can't use it. So it's like Rav Chanan bar, it's like Reb Ami bar Tavyomi. Okay, well that's it for the tuma entire stuff. So let's go weiter. Till next time, I guess. Hachodet begadish. Now the Mishnah had said that if you have a fellow and he's got like a pile of straw or something, and he just kind of hollows out the pile, and now there's space inside that you can, I guess, sit in. It's 10 tefachim. So the Mishnah had said that by hollowing out this pile, it's a pasul sukkah. We learned it also, we talked about it the other day, because of Taisav Illumina also, you have to make a sukkah. It can't just emerge on its own. And if you construct a sukkah by hollowing out the inside of it, and then memele you have a sukkah, that doesn't work, because you didn't really construct the sukkah, you just kind of like hollowed out the inside and like, oh wow, magically, look, I guess technically we now have a sukkah. But you didn't build a sukkah, you didn't build a frame and put schach on top of it, you really just hollowed out the inside, and now voila, you're left with a sukkah, but that's not going to work. Now, Amr Rav Huna lo shanu ela she'ein sham chalul tefach b'meshech shiva. Aval yesh sham chalul tefach b'meshech shiva arei ze sukkah. You hear that? It's a very interesting chilek that Rav Huna makes. Rav Huna says that when we say that you're not allowed to hollow out a sukkah, that means if your mom is starting from scratch, you have this pile of straw, it's just a pile of straw, and now you say, you know what, I'm going to make this into a sukkah, so you like hollow it out, and now you're left with a sukkah. That doesn't work. However, says Rav Huna, if there was already an ohel of a tefach, right? So if there was already space of, a tefach between the top of the pile and the rest of the pile, I guess, and now you're just basically making the pile, like the space larger. So meaning there was already a space of a tefach in there, and a tefach, of course, we know already is an ohel. So there was essentially already an ohel, and therefore the top of that ohel is considered schach. It isn't a kosher sukkah because it needs to be 10 tefachim, but that's no big deal. So you just have to, it's like we learned the other day that if you have a sukkah that's less than 10 tefachim, you can kind of dig out the ground to make it 10 tefachim, and that's okay. So you're basically doing the same thing, says Rav Huna. So if you have a pile of straw and there's already a tefach of space in that pile, and you just need to make that tefach into 10 tefachim, and you basically dig out the pile in order to make it 10 tefachim, that's completely fine because you already have the schach there. Okay, so therefore, right, so let's read it again. Amar Rav Huna lo shanu ela she'ein sham chalul tefach b'meshech shiva. So it says Rav Huna that when we say that you're not allowed to hollow out a pile in order to make a sukkah, that's only if you literally have to start from scratch. If there was no space of a tefach and your mamish have to dig out entirely a sukkah. But if there's already a tefach of space in that pile, and it's 7 tefachim by 7 tefachim, which is Rosh Hashanah b'Shulchano, it just isn't 10 tefachim tall, it's only 1 tefach tall. Well, in that case, harei ze sukkah. If you hollow out the rest of the pile, basically just making the sukkah taller, well then that would work. Tanan Yachid, we learn in a brayso like this: Achotet begadish lasos lo sukkah. That if a fellow hollows out a pile in order to make a sukkah, harei ze sukkah. Itaka is a good sukkah, it works. But I thought in our Mishnah said it doesn't work. So elalav shmamina kedu Rav Huna shmamina. Rather, it must be, you have to explain like Rav Huna says, that when the Mishnah says it doesn't work, that's talking about if you have to, you just have a pile and you're making it from scratch. When the Mishnah says it doesn't work. But when it does work is when there's already a chalal tefach, there's already a tefach of space, so you already basically have schach, and you just need to make the sukkah taller, so you dig it out to make it taller, that's fine. Those who say the same thing but as a question rather than as a statement, right? Up until now we said, says Rav Huna, he explains that our Mishnah is talking about when there's no space. So those who say it's slightly different, they just ask it as a question and answer, which is, Tanan, our Mishnah says, our Mishnah on the one hand says that if you hollow out a pile, it doesn't work as a sukkah. But we have a brayso that says it is a good sukkah. So Amar Rav Huna lo kasha, Rav Huna comes to answer and say, no, it's no problem. When there's already a space of a tefach, it'll be a kosher sukkah. B'meshech shiva, if 7 tefachim by 7 tefachim wide by 1 tefach tall, and now you dig it out to complete it, that's fine. But if there is no space of a tefach that's 7 tefachim by 7 tefachim wide, so then you can't just hollow out a sukkah because tai sevilum, also you can't just wow, amazing, a sukkah just emerged by hollowing out the middle. That doesn't work. But if there's already a space of a tefach, and there's already an oel, and the top is already considered schach for this little oel, and you just basically increase the height of it by hollowing out the pile, that's okay. It's basically similar to when you have a sukkah that's less than 10 tefachim, and you basically dig out the ground in order to make it 10 tefachim, which we said on Daf Daled is okay. Alright friends, now we get to a brand new Mishnah. Mishalshal defanus milamayla lemata. So, we have a situation now of gurachis, a wall, right? We learned about it in Masechta Eruvin, Masechta Shabbos as well. Gurachis, a wall that goes down, right? It's talking about a wall that's 10 tefachim tall, and it starts at the top of the sukkah by the schach, and it goes down 10 tefachim, but doesn't reach the ground. There's space between the wall and the ground. So mishalshel tefonos milamayla lamata. So if somebody kind of constructs a wall at the top of the sukkah going downwards, but it doesn't quite reach the ground, im gavo min haaretz shlosha tefachim psula. Well, if there's 3 tefachim of space, enough for a little goat to get in, so then, right, you don't say lavud anymore, and if it's 3 tefachim, then we assume that gedim bokenbo, a little goat can get in, and it's going to be a problem. We can't say gudachis because the little goaties can get in. Milamata lamala, but if you build the 10 tefachim at the bottom from the ground up, well then, im gavo asar tefachim kshera, as long as the wall is 10 tefachim tall, we could say good asik, that the wall just goes all the way up to the schach, even if the schach is, as long as the schach is less than 20 amas from the ground, you could just have a 10 tefach wall, and the rest is just good asik, and the wall goes up. Rabbi Yossi Omer says, Rabbi Yossi, k'shem shemilamata lamayla asar tefachim kach milamayla lamata asar tefachim. Says Rabbi Yossi, actually, no. We could say that just like we say good asik, just like a wall that's 10 tefachim starting from the ground, we could say that it goes all the way up. So then also a wall that's 10 tefachim starting from the schach, we could say it goes all the way down to the ground, even if the little goat friends can get through. But my kamiflage, says the Gemara, what is the machlokas between the Tanakam and Rabbi Yossi? Marsav mechitza tluya materes, marsav mechitza tluya ena materes. It's a machlokas about mechitza tluya. When you have a wall that's hanging, is that acceptable on Shabbos? So, is that acceptable on Shabbos? Meaning, like we said, do we say good achis or not? If you have a mechitza that there's 3 tefachim of space between the bottom of the wall and the ground, can we say good achis that the wall goes down? Right? Do we say mechitza tluya materes that a wall that's hanging is considered a good wall? So we'll say the Tanakama says no, we don't say that. We don't say mechitza tluya materes, and Rabbi Yossi says we do say that. That's what we want to say. Where am I? Tanan Osam. We learned in the Mishnah in Eruvin. Okay, borsha ben shtei chatzeris. Okay, great. Okay, it's a hard, obviously this is complicated. It's Eruvin, but we've done it before, so at least we have the tools to work with it. So what are we talking about? We're talking about 2 chatzeris. Okay, of course, brings us back to Eruvin, Gavaldig. We have 2 chatzeris, and in between the 2 chatzeris is a wall separating the 2 chatzeris. Now, there's also a well. Like a pit like a water pit thing. And, it's dug into the ground, and the wall that divides the 2 chutzers goes, splits the well in half. So the well is not above ground, it's mamish ground level, and you just stick a pail in there and you grab your water. And the wall that divides the 2 chutzers, mamish, goes right over the well. Okay? So borsha ben shtei chatzeris, you have this, well, or let's call it a water pit. I feel like well may imply that it goes above ground, but it's not talking about above ground, it's below ground. So it's just a pit that's filled with water, and you can use it to chop water. So, and it's divided in half by this wall that divides the chutzers. Ein mimalim b'mena b'Shabbos, so you're not allowed to fill up water from this water pit on Shabbos, because there's no eruv between the 2 chutzers, and therefore you're not allowed to chop water from the water pit, because you might be chopping water from the other chutzer's water, right? From the water coming from the other chutzer, and you didn't make an eruv with them, so it's not allowed. Okay? Ela imkein osla mechitza asar tefachim, unless you made a mechitza of 10 tefachim. Skip the next 2 words. Bein milamata, bein besoch ogno. So, but the only way that you'd be able to chop water on Shabbos is if you made a wall inside the pit, whether this wall is inside the pit down all the way to the right where the water starts, or whether it's limala b'soch ogno, right, or whether it's mamish right at the top of the pit, meaning like right at the beginning of the pit, for the first 10 tefachim of the pit, there's this wall, and then there's space between the bottom of the wall and the water. That would also be okay, because kalu shekelu chacham b'mayim, remember that we're lenient when it comes to water, that we could say good achis when it comes to water, well, like a wall that's constructed for water. So therefore, Therefore, okay, so it says the Tanakama, simply if you construct a wall, simply if you just have the wall dividing the two chatzers and it goes right over the pit, that's not going to make any difference. You can't draw water from that pit on Shabbos. However, if you construct a wall inside the pit, whether that wall is all the way down to the water, whether it's just the first 10 tefachim from the top, but if it's inside the pit, so then that would be considered a wall, and you would now be able to draw water on Shabbos. Okay? Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer says, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Beis Shammai Omer Milabayla. Beis Shammai says that you can construct this wall inside the pit at the top. Beis Hillel Omer Milamata. Beis Hillel say that no, the wall inside the pit actually has to be down to the water. Okay, fine. Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda lote mechitza gedola min akosa shebenein, and says Rabbi Yehuda, no, you don't have to do any of this fancy stuff. You have a wall between the two chatzers, and the wall goes, kind of splits the pit in half. Even if it doesn't go inside the pit, as long as it runs over the pit, that's okay. We could say, the wall, assuming that it's 10 tefachim tall, which mistama it is, if it's a wall. So it's 10 tefachim tall. So we could say that when it goes over the pit, it goes right down. That mechitza tluya materes, that we can assume that the wall just goes right down into the pit and divides it in half. So let's say, Amar Rabbi Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, says Rabbi Bar Chana, the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yehuda b'shittas Rabbi Yossi Amra. So let's say that Rabbi Yehuda is saying like Rabbi Yossi, Tamim mechitza tluya materes, who says that a mechitza tluya is matir, right? Meaning just like Givaldik. So let's say that just like Rabbi Yossi says in our Mishnah that if you have part of the wall of the sukkah at the top by the schach, so we could say good achis, that the wall, right, mechitza tluya, that it goes all the way down. So Rabbi Yehuda is saying the same thing when it comes to Shabbos. That you have this wall that goes over the well. The wall's 10 tefachim tall. We could say it goes straight down into the well. So let's say that Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi agree. Vilohi. It's not like what Rabbi Bar Chana wants to suggest in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda are saying the same thing. Lo Rabbi Yehuda savelak Rabbi Yossi, lo Rabbi Yossi savelak Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold like Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi does not hold like Rabbi Yehuda. Lo Rabbi Yehuda savelak Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yehuda does not hold like Rabbi Yossi. So meaning, even though Rabbi Yossi says that when it comes to a sukkah, the wall can go from the schach down to the ground. I'm sorry, one second. Meaning, lo Rabbi Yehuda savelak Rabbi Yossi, meaning, let's say it the other way. That even though Rabbi Yehuda says that when it comes to Shabbos, the wall that goes over the pit, we can consider like it goes straight down into the pit. He would disagree when it comes to Sukkah. He would not agree with Rabbi Yossi when it comes to Sukkah. How come? Because Adkan lo kam Rabbi Yehuda asum ela be'eruve chatzeres derabanan. Because Rabbi Yehuda, when he says that we could say that mechitza tluya materes by the well, by the pit in the between the two chatzers, that's talking about a hilchos eruvin, which is derabanan. Mida oraisa, both chatzers are rishus hayachid. The pit is rishus hayachid. Mida oraisa, there's nothing wrong with chapping water from, even from the other chatzer into your chatzer. However, the chachamim have the hilchos eruvin, and they say, look, don't, only take from one chatzer to another chatzer if you make an eruv. So therefore, says Rabbi Yehuda, by hilchos eruvin, which is only midirabanan anyways, so we could say that mechitza tluya materes. Aval hacha sukkah d'oraisa lo. But sukkah, which is a mitzvah d'oraisa, Rabbi Yehuda would disagree with Rabbi Yossi and say that a wall that starts at the top of the sukkah by the schach, we cannot say that it goes straight down to the ground if it's larger than 3 tefachim. Meaning if the space is larger than 3 tefachim, which is Gedim Bokenbo, Rabbi Yehuda would say that that's a problem because sukkah is d'oraisa. V'lo, Rabbi Yossi savelak Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yossi would disagree with Rabbi Yehuda that even though Rabbi Yossi says that when it comes to a sukkah, this wall that starts by the schach, we could say it goes all the way down to the ground. Rabbi Yossi only says his opinion by a sukkah because a sukkah is a mitzvah saseh. Aval Shabbos, there's a skila lo. But Shabbos, which, even though, yes, this might be hilchos eruvin, which is derabanan, but Shabbos as a concept is something that you're chayiv skila for. Sukkah, you're not chayiv skila for. It's a mitzvah saseh. If you don't do it, you're mevatel mitzvah saseh. I think that we learned somewhere, where did we say somewhere, that like if you mevatel mitzvah saseh, so then you bring a korban. what was it, Davka, like a court, like a shore or something, whatever it is. But if you don't bring a mitzvah say, so you move out the mitzvah say, you bring a korban, you bring a korban chatas, whatever it is. But you're not chayiv skila. Shabbos as a concept, if you there are things that if you do them on Shabbos, if you do malacha on Shabbos, you chayiv skila. So that makes Shabbos just as a concept more stringent, and therefore Rabbi Yossi doesn't feel comfortable saying that on Shabbos, even when it comes to Hilchos Eruvin, which themselves are derabanan, but we're dealing with Hilchos Shabbos, which in general, Malacha on Shabbos is an Isser Skila, so we don't want to mess around with that. And Rabbi Yossi would say that in the case of the pit, the wall would not just memele go down into the pit, and we would not say Mechitza Tluya Materes. So therefore, Rav Bar Chana said the name of Rabbi Yochanan, he wanted to suggest that maybe Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi agree that Mechitza Tluya Materes, to which the Gemara says it's not true. Rabbi Yehuda says that Mechitza Tluya Materes by Eruvin, which is derabanan, but not by Sukkah deoraisa, and Rabbi Yossi says that Mechitza Tluya Materes is by Sukkah, which is a mitzvah saseh, but he would not be willing to say Mechitza Tluya by Hilchos Eruvin, which is by Shabbos, which Shabbos conceptually is something that you chayiv skila, that is a punishment of skila. So he would not feel comfortable saying Mechitza Tluya in the context of Eruvin. Vim Tamar, and if you're going to say Ma'aser Shnaisa B'Tzipori Al Pi Mi Naisa, so if you're going to say, but then what happened in Tzipori? No, what are we talking about? Meaning, if we're saying that according to Rabbi Yossi, that Rabbi Yossi does not feel comfortable saying that on Shabbos we would say Mechitza Tluya Materes, right? So when it comes to Sukkah, Rabbi Yossi would say Mechitza Tluya Materes, but on Shabbos he would not say Mechitza Tluya Materes. So if that's the case, the story that happened in Tzipori, now of course we know that Rabbi Yossi was in Tzipori. Rashi points out that Rabbi Yossi was the Rosh Yeshiva in Tzipori. We also know from the Gemara in Shabbos and Daf Lamed Gimel that Rabbi Yossi was exiled to Tzipori from the Romans. So the question is, there was a story that happened in Tzipori where we say Mechitza Tluya Materes, and therefore Mistama, if it happened in Tzipori, the Mistama, it was Rabbi Yossi's opinion. But I thought we just wanted to argue that Rabbi Yossi would say that we do not say Mechitza Tluya Materes on Shabbos. Chavi, you hear the kasha? So again, the story that happened in Tzipori, which we'll see in a minute, where we said that Mechitza Tluya is Materes, well then, who gave the psak? Who gave the go-ahead? So answers the Gemara, Lo Al Pi Rabbi Yossi, Lo Al Pi Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi. Interesting. So that wasn't Rabbi Yossi, as Rashi points out. Rabbi Yossi by then had already passed away, and it was his son Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi. Interesting that he argued with his father, but Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi said that we could assume Mechitza Tluya Materes. Rabbi Yossi would not say Mechitza Tluya Materes on Shabbos. Umay Maisa, what's the story? Tchiyasu Rav Dimi Omar, then when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, he said, Pamachas shochachu v'lo haviu Sefer Torah me'erev Shabbos. That one time they forgot, and they didn't bring the Sefer Torah to the shul before Shabbos. That they wouldn't keep the Sefer Torah in the shul because they were scared that it would get stolen. So they would bring it before Shabbos. Now, why would they bring it before Shabbos? Because they couldn't bring it on Shabbos. Well, they didn't bring it before Shabbos, and they also forgot to make, whether it's Eruv Chatzeris, if it was all in the same Chatzor, whether it was Shitufim Avos, if the Beis Knesset was in a different Chatzor in the Mavui, whatever it is. But basically they were stuck. They were in a situation where the Sefer Torah was not in the shul, and they also didn't make, whether it's Eruv Chatzeris or Shitufim Avos, whatever they had to do. So how do you get the Sefer Torah to the shul to read from it on Shabbos? So the Malcha Persus Din Nagabi Amudim, they view Sefer Torah v'karubo. And so the next day what they did was they spread out some kind of a sheet on top of like pillars, and like that the sheet didn't quite reach the ground, but they were able to say good achis, that Mechitza Tluya Materes, and they were able to then transport the Sefer Torah. That way it kind of worked out. It was no longer an issue of Chatzeris because it was just going directly from the shul to from the house that it was in to the shul. Fine. Whatever it is, they worked it out. So Persu Sakadate, how could it be that they actually spread out a sheet on top of the pillars? How did you carry it from, the chotzer into the mavui in order to put it on the pillars? No, the sheets were already on top of the pillars, and they view Sefer Torah v'karubo, and then they were able to read from the Sefer Torah. So meaning, we were able to say Mechitza Tluya Materes, and that was okay, and that was Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, not Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi would say that Mechitza Tluya Materes does not work on Shabbos, only by Sukkah. Fine. Omer Rav Chizda says Rav Chizda Omer Avimi, in the name of Avimi, Machzelas Arba V'Mashu Materes B'Sukkah Mishum Dofen. Okay. Says Rav Chizda in the name of Avimi, you could take a wall that is a little bit more than 4 tfachim tall, and you could put it in the middle of a wall, and that would work, right, between the schach. So if you have a sukkah that's 10 tfachim tall, and you take a wall that's a little bit more than 4 tfachim, and you put it right between the schach and the ground, so it's a little bit less than 3 tfachim from this small little wall and the ground, and also a little bit less than 3 tfachim between the small little wall and the schach. So you say lavud in both directions, and now you have a 10 tefach wall. So Heichi Ovid, how do you do this? Tali le be'emtza pachus mishlosh lamato pachus mishlosh lamayla. So you put it in the middle of the wall, within 3 tfachim of the ground and within 3 tfachim of the schach. V'chol pachus mishlosh klavadami, and as long as it's within 3 tfachim, it's considered lavud. So we see it's connected to the ground and connected to the schach as well, and you have a solid wall. Pshita, the Gemara says, well, this is obvious. What's the chiddush that we say lavud? Well, I may have meaning to say that maybe we only say lavud in one direction. Kamash Milan, that we could even say lavud in 2 directions and say that we have a wall by connecting the wall on top and below. Fine. Meisve, we have a kasha. Machzela shiva v'mashu materes besukkah mishum dofen. So now the Gemara says, but 1 second, we have a brayso that says dafka, we need the wall to be a little bit more than 7. It's not enough for it to be just a little bit more than 4. So Kitanya Aiba Sukkah Gedola. So that's dafka talking about a very tall, well, not even a very tall sukkah, but a sukkah that's taller than 10 tefachim. Umay Kamashmalam, what it's saying is the Mishalshan Defonus Milamai Lamata Kirabiosi Zeu. So what it's saying that this brayso is dafka Rabiosi, and what it's saying is that in a situation where you have a sukkah that's taller than 10 tefachim, so let's just say, 10 tefachim is pretty short, so it's just like a regular sized sukkah, and you have a wall that's a 7 and a little bit tefachim tall, and you put it within 3 tefachim of the schach, so now it's considered like you have a wall that's 10 tefachim tall at the top, and we're saying that it's kosher like Rabbi Yossi, who says mechitza tluya materes when it comes to a sukkah. Fine. Amr Reb Ami says, Reb Ami pasar ba'ava mashu mater b'sukkah mishum dofen. It says Reb Ami that if you take a wall that's 4 and a little bit, and you use that as one of your 2 full walls in a sukkah, that's okay. And you put it within 3 tfachim of the wall, and then we'll say lavud, right? So meaning, if you have one wall that's 7 tfachim long, and then you have another wall that's 4 tfachim and a little bit, and you put it within 3 tfachim of the first wall to make like an L, so that works because we'll say lavud between the 4 and a little bit and the other wall. So now it's like you have a 7 tefach wall. Now you have 2 7 tefach walls. Now you just need a third wall that's 1 tefach and you're good. So my kamash milan. So what's the chiddush that we say lavud? That we know lavud. Hakamash milan shir meshech sukkah ketanas shiva. What it's teaching us is that the size of a small sukkah is 7 tefachim. To answer Hillel's kasha from the other day, Hillel asked the other day, like, wait, I don't understand. Where did we get 7 tefachim by 7 tefachim by? I know Rosh of Rubo, I know Dalet Amos. What's 7 tefachim? Where does that come up? Where does that come from? It comes from here. That we're saying, so we see from this brayso, from the fact that we're saying that if you have a wall that's 4 tefachim and a little bit, and you put it within 3 tefachim of the other wall, we say lavud, i.e., we're looking for a wall that's 7 tefachim. 7 tefachim is the minimum size of a sukkah. There you have it. And it must be that Rosh of Rubo of Shulchana, which is the minimum size of a sukkah, is taka 7 tefachim. Cheve, that was the Tazayin of Masechta Sukkah, packed a shtickle punch. The daf started out talking about using bed panels as schach. Now the interesting thing about bed panels is that bed panels, if it's just the panel in and of itself, it's pshuta klei, it's what should be the problem. So first we wanted to say that it's like Rav Ami bar Tavyomi, who says that, well, when it comes to fabric, if you use even very small fabric, that in and of itself is not makabel tuma, but it came from a larger fabric, so therefore it still is makabel tuma, and you're not allowed to use it for schach. And we'll say the same thing by this bed panel, that even though in and of itself it's pshuta kleitz and it should be fine, but because it comes from a bed frame, and now you're just taking this one panel, so it remains makabel tuma, and therefore it's not allowed to be used, which the Gemara says, no, that's actually not necessarily what it's talking about. Here we're talking about the bed panel that's connected with the 2 legs, and because it's connected with the 2 legs, it's considered a kli because you can kind of connect it to the wall with like ropes and things, and that's why it is. That's why it's makabel tuma and it's not allowed to be used. But we ultimately saw, right, that there's this opinion of Reb Ami bar Tavyomi who says that when it comes to fabrics, since they came from a larger fabric, it wouldn't be used. So I guess if we pass like Rav Ami bar Tavyomi, I guess we would say that mistama, even then just the panel on its own would not work because it came from a larger kli. But yeah. And then we discussed the gadish, that if you hollow out, right, if you have a pile of straw and then you hollow out the inside and then essentially make a sukkah that way, we say it's no good because it's taisav lo min asui. Rav Huna pointed out an important distinction, which is that's only if the pile didn't have already a space of a tefach that was 7 by 7 with the height of a tefach. If he did have that, and then you started with that, and therefore the roof was already kind of like considered schach, and then you just kind of dug it out, well then it's similar to a sukkah that is less than 10 tefachim that you dig out the ground to make it 10 tefachim, which is okay. So Rav Huna makes that important distinction that when the Mishnah says that you're not allowed to dig out a pile to make a sukkah, that's only if there's no space in the pile already. But if there's already a space in the pile that's a tefach, that's 7 by 7 tefachim wide and a tefach tall, so then you would be able to dig it out. We got to a new Mishnah with an interesting machlokas between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yossi. So first of all, everybody agrees that if you take a wall that's 10 tefachim tall and you put it on the ground, we could say good asik that the wall goes all the way up to the schach. Everyone agrees. Givaldik. The interesting shaila becomes, what happens when you put that wall by the schach? Can we say that the wall now goes down to the ground? So if it's less than 3 tefachim from the bottom of the wall to the ground, so then yeah, we say love it and it's no problem. But if it's more than that, the Tanna Kama says that no, since the goats can get in, it's no good. But if but Rabbi Yossi says no, we could say the mechitza tluya materes, and that the mechitza goes down to the ground. We then saw that when it comes to Shabbos, Rabbi Yehuda says that we could say mechitza tluya materes when it comes to ilchos erevin on Shabbos, to say that the wall goes down into a pit, and now you could take water from the pit on Shabbos. We said though that Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi would disagree. That Rabbi Yossi would disagree with Rabbi Yehuda regarding the wall in the chutzner, because Shabbos is more stringent, because there's, technically speaking, an isur skila associated with it. And Rabbi Yehuda would say that you would be unable to say mechitza tluya in the context of a sukkah, which is the oraisa, whereas erevin is only really midrabanan. And then at the end there, we saw some interesting things, halachos about lavud. For example, that you can have a wall that's 4 and a little bit tefachim and put it in the middle of your wall, close to the schach and close to the ground, and that could be considered a wall, because we'll say lavud in both directions. And we also learned at the end, interestingly, that the minimum size of a sukkah is dafka 7 tefachim, i.e. the definition of Rosh Rubo v'Shulchano is 7 tefachim. Chevre, that was daf Zayin. I hope you enjoy your day. Cheers.